Alrighty, happy Friday. Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for joining us for the series is continuing with Kevin Fitzgerald, session one, one-to-one staffing. What exactly does it mean? So during today's hour and a half presentation, you will have the chance to earn 1.5 CEUs. And if you came to the other sessions or any of our previous webinars before, then you know how they work. You'll have to answer the poll questions that pop up throughout the presentation today. And the way, oh, actually, I'm so sorry. And I will be analyzing that data on probably like Monday morning. So you'll have your certificate instructions to you by lunchtime on Monday. I did send an email with the handouts earlier this morning, but if you did not get the handout, which is just like a copy of the presentation, then you can download it under handouts there, or you can send me an email and I can send it to you via email there too. And if you had any questions during today's presentation, feel free to put your questions, your situations, anything you need to talk to Kevin about into the questions box, and we will totally have a Q&A and some time for feedback and some conversation. So I think that's all I have to say for now. So I'm going to shut off and turn it over to Kevin.
Want to welcome everybody this afternoon. At least it's this afternoon here in Massachusetts. I don't know where the rest of you may be, but after the initial series, we decided that there were a few more topics that I thought were relevant, and I don't see much about these topics being discussed by other clinicians. I don't know why that is, because I certainly think they're relevant topics. I just want to remind you that in addition to today's webinar, this is a shameless plug, we are doing 2 additional webinars, one on November 19th, titled Group Home Living, Why Can't We All Just Get Along? Which should give you a chuckle. Those of you that work in group home residences know why I came up with that topic. And last but not least, on December 17th, the next transformation, moving from group residences to more individualized and normalized habitats, because the reality is, whether we want to admit it, the group home model is rapidly fading for lots of reasons. One has to do with the prohibitive cost. So if you're interested in those topics, welcome you to join up and listen to what we have to say and get your feedback. Now today, I've told most of you that I think have attended most of the other webinars. I'm assuming that there might be a couple of new people, at least regarding getting to know me a little bit. I've been doing this work for over 35 years now. And one of the things I've always found intriguing is that, but pretty consistently over the 35 years, what I continue to hear when I get into different agencies with different situations where people are exhibiting challenging or problematic behaviors, one of the mantras I hear over and over again is, quote unquote, if we only had more staff, we only had more staff. And more recently, over the past probably 5 to 10 years, what I find a lot of agencies advocating for people that are exhibiting challenging behaviors that they can't seem to effectively manage otherwise is, we need a one-to-one. We need a one-to-one. So that's the topic of today's webinar, obviously, because as I go about my business in different agencies and different places, a lot of people say they need a one-to-one, but they don't necessarily know what the heck to do with it, or how to use a one-to-one as a resource, as a support. They wish for it, and poof, magically, if the funding comes through, okay, here's your extra money. DDS decided to come through and give you the additional revenue. So first of all, you got to fill that position, right? Which is not an easy thing to do these days. Now there are some agencies, as you're aware, I know one in Massachusetts that effective today, literally effective today, is letting go a number of their staff that can't prove that they've been vaccinated. So we had an incredible staffing shortage initially for lots of reasons. That's now been compounded by the decisions that certain agencies have made, that if you're not fully vaccinated, We won't get into the politics of it or the science behind it because we could be here until dark. But they're letting people go, which I find incredible with acute staff shortage. So again, getting back to today's topic, as I go about my business, I see lots of agencies saying, A, we need more staff, and B, if we could just have a one-to-one. So I really want to dissect this today and give you my experiences and thoughts about what a one-to-one is, what they're supposed to do, and what the exact function of a one-to-one should be. Because I think in many cases I've been involved in, nobody really knows. So let's take a minute and look at this from a historical perspective a little bit. From my vantage point, one-to-ones have traditionally been provided for those individuals who engage in high rates and or high intensity of challenging behaviors. So the reality is the vast majority of people that get a one-to-one assigned to them are getting a one-to-one assigned to them because they're exhibiting either a frequency of behaviors that's exceptionally challenging, or the intensity of the behaviors, or it could be a combination of both. So it could be high frequency or high intensity, or both. So when we haven't been able to diminish or decrease or eliminate some of those problem behaviors through the more traditional methodology, which we'll talk about a little later, we get into this one-to-one mindset. Person needs a one-to-one. And then, of course, you have to have data to back up why you need it. You have to advocate like hell to the various funding agencies to get them to agree with that. Then the money has to be made available. One-to-ones are, very, very expensive. We'll talk about that too later on. So again, one-to-ones, from my perspective, have historically been assigned for individuals that have high rates or high frequencies of aberrant behaviors. This is the point I'm going to make here on number 2 is one that I oftentimes find missing, which bothers me and flexes me. A careful analysis must be done, should have been done, regarding what has been unsuccessful in supporting the identified person prior to deciding that the assignment of a one-to-one was the best or only option. Now, for those of us that are logical and intuitive and have gotten training and know how to do things in a sequential kind of order and stepology, that sounds kind of silly. Well, of course we've done. No, many times when I see individuals, agencies, executives, management advocating for one-to-ones, I like to immediately look at what have you done before we got to this point. And oftentimes I'm not happy with what I find. They just think, poof, that one-to-one is going to be the cure that they need, or the solution that's avoided them. I don't necessarily agree with that at all. Some of the most common behavioral categories for which one-to-ones are assigned include self-injurious behavior. These are just the biggies, the ones that I've seen. Self-injurious behavior, physical aggression, usually fairly intense. Pica, which true pica, as I've said in some of my previous webinars, is exceedingly rare, very, very rare. People oftentimes exhibit behaviors that mimic pica, but they're not real pica. They eat excessive food, people call it pica. They put things in their mouth and they mouth the object, they don't swallow it, people call it pica. It's not pica. Elopement. So if people take off and we don't know where the hell they're going and there's no antecedent, we can't lock them in the house. Of course, that's a good thing. If we live near a busy street, if they don't have any personal safety skills, if they might have bad intentions when they run away to do something to somebody out in the community that's not okay, that might be a reason why you would advocate for a one-to-one. And then finally, any type of sexually deviant or at-risk behaviors. Away, I apologize to grab my phone so I can monitor the time. So now, after we talked about the historical perspectives on one-to-ones, at least from my vantage point, let's talk about the expense and level of support, because these are real issues. One-to-one staffing can be prohibitively expensive. Guys, we all know money is tight, man. Money is real tight, and it's shrinking every day. More and more people are fighting for entitlement dollars, some of which I think are rightfully entitled to them, others not so much. Again, that's a debate for another day. But it costs a lot of money to fund a one-to-one for an individual, particularly if it goes across shifts. This can easily run in to $80,000 to $100,000 a year, depending upon what you're paying the staff, benefits, what have you. So this is a big ticket item. So another reason why when people say to me, Kev, we need a one-to-one, I immediately start getting into the weeds. I want to see what you've done. How did we get here? Why do you think that's the only solution to this problem? Because generally speaking, if you're not picking up on it by now, I'm not a big fan of one-to-ones. Sometimes they're necessary, but for lots of reasons, I don't like the model. And we'll get into more detail about that in a while. Other factors influencing when one-to-one support might be required or needed include specific environments. So does the person engage in these problematic, intense, frequent, challenging behaviors when they're in certain environments? Well, oftentimes that's the case. It's rare that people do the broad spectrum of all the things that they do across all environments and all situations and all staff and all peers. I'm not saying it doesn't happen, but it's relatively rare. Most people engage in their repertoire of behaviors under certain situations or conditions, which hopefully we can identify, right? That's part of our training as behavior analysts. Specific activities. So is it during specific activities where the person has a higher propensity or higher probability of engaging in some of the problem behaviors, where the one-to-one support might need to be assigned? Particular times of the day. Can we pinpoint when a person is more? I have some people that in the mornings, for whatever reason, that just tends to be the time of one-to-one has to have heightened awareness that the person is more vulnerable, more at risk, maybe to themselves, maybe to their peers. So that's a time where the one-to-one has to be really acutely aware of what's going on and hopefully been trained to intervene properly. And we're going to talk about that in a little bit. Does one-to-one support need to be provided during the overnight hours when individuals are typically asleep? That's another consideration. That's an 8-hour shift. If you can eliminate that need for a one-to-one support, that's $30,000, $40,000 a year that you just saved. There are some people that have nocturnal behaviors. They sleep very poorly. They do things during the night. We won't get into all the details and the nuances, but you may have an individual that does in fact require a one-to-one during the overnight hours. In my experience, that's relatively rare. I'm not saying it doesn't happen, but most people that have one-to-one support, you can back off that level of support during the overnight hours. Not necessarily completely, but you can minimize it to less than one-to-one. This is an interesting question. Will one-to-one support be provided during activities that take place away from the residence, such as during home visits? So that's an interesting question. I have a lot of people, for a year and a half during the height of the pandemic, although I guess we're still in it. I haven't figured it out yet. But the pandemic, from what I consider, when it first, thrust itself on us to several months ago before there was a vaccine available, nobody went home. So this wasn't much of a problem, right? Because people weren't allowed to leave the residence. They were pretty much on lockdown. So now that people are allowed to visit family members more frequently than they were previously, does the one-to-one go with them? If they go home for a family visit and they're spending the weekend with their mother and the father and their sisters and the brothers, does the one-to-one need to go with them? And if the one-to-one doesn't need to go with them, that raises an interesting question. Well, why is this person able to be effectively managed safely at home without a one-to-one level of support, but yet we need it in the group home residence? That makes me think of all different types of possibilities. So that's yet another consideration. What is the plan for one-to-one support if the person attends a work program or has some type of a job? If they go to a day program, does the one-to-one go with them? Or do they get absorbed into the milieu and the staff ratio that the day program naturally has available? Or does the day program provide their own one-to-one? Or does the residential one-to-one go with them to the day program? Or another possibility, is it not even necessary for them to have a one-to-one at the day program? Because the behaviors don't warrant that they require a one-to-one during the day program hours, which are typically from 8 to 3, 9 to 3. Most agencies are funded to provide a 6-hour day. Or what if they have a vocational program? I have a lot of people that have real jobs, particularly now when people are desperate for help everywhere. I mean, people with disabilities now, if they ever wanted to work, man, now's the time to get a job because they're plentiful. I mean, they're out there. So does the one-to-one go with the individual to the work site? And if so, how do you orchestrate that to make that look as natural as possible so that nobody gets nervous? Why does this person have someone with them all the time, right? Because then they start to ask the questions. And if we answer them honestly, they may not have a job very long, right? So we got to be careful what we say. So another problem with one-to-ones is that there's a high rate of burnout. It's very common for staff assigned as one-to-ones to experience a high rate of burnout or turnover due to the stress inherent in the level of supervision and monitoring that they're expected to provide, as well as potential intervention they need to provide to the supported person. So if we're talking about a person, depending upon the severity of the behaviors and under what conditions, circumstances, that one-to-one may have to be ready to chase the person in a moment's notice. They may have to provide some type of physical intervention, including the possibility of an emergency restraint, depending upon the severity of the behavior or what the individual is trying to do, either to themselves, if it's very serious, intense, self-injurious behavior, or if they're attempting to repetitively assault another peer or staff person. So in my experience with one-to-ones, I found it preferable to rotate among a few different staff. So if you have a one-to-one, it's good to have a pool of 3 or 4 people that have agreed to act in that capacity. Hopefully all been well trained. That's another thing that's oftentimes missing. We say, you're Joe's one-to-one, and we don't really give anyone a blueprint as to what the heck they're supposed to do. You know, just, you're Joe's one-to-one, watch them, don't let them get into any trouble, that's your job. And then I know I'm minimizing it a little bit and trying to make it overly simplistic, but that's not that far removed from some situations I've been involved in. You know, it's like they give you the sign of the cross, the good luck, God bless you, he's your responsibility. Terrible. Terrible that we expect staff to step in to these very complicated situations. And then we admonish them or berate them for some type of intervention that we don't think was appropriate given the situation. When we haven't trained them properly, give me a break. It is very common that the supported person will develop a reliance on the direct presence of the one-to-one to prevent and discourage them from engaging in identified high-risk behaviors. So in addition to a whole host of problems associated with one-to-ones, the expense, the burnout factor, do the one-to-ones even know exactly what they're supposed to do? What is their precise function? On top of all of that, I find that if you have a situation where the one-to-one calls out sick someday and you have no backup, the individual has a field day because they have learned that the only reason why they don't engage in this whole repertoire of problematic, challenging, disruptive behaviors is because the one-to-one is there to stop them from doing it. And that's a bad message to send, because we're not, ultimately the goal, in my opinion, is and always has been to teach individuals to take as much responsibility and accountability for their own behavior as they can. So if they projected all of that responsibility on the one-to-one to prevent them from doing all these things, we've created a really bad, potentially problematic situation. All right, let's do poll question number 1, please, Marissa.
All right, everyone. So if you've never been to one of our webinars before, then this is what the poll questions look like. And if you have, then you know exactly what to do. So it is preferable to rotate staff acting as one-to-ones. True or false? And you can just put your answer right into the multiple choice interface. And if you have any trouble with that interface at all, feel free to put your answer either in a Word doc or the body of an email, and you can send it to me afterwards. And that will perfectly suffice for your participation. Just please do not put it in the questions box. I'm unable to easily analyze the data for your CEUs that way. Alrighty, so I am going to shut this down in 3, 2, and 1. Awesome. So it looks like everybody said true.
I love it. We rarely get 100%, but it's always good when we do. Are there any questions that anyone might have relative to what we've discussed so far? Anybody take exception to what I've said, had different experiences, have anything that's unclear? Before we continue, I'll take a question or two if anybody has any.
Alrighty. So are there any recommendations on assessments for appropriate staffing levels?
That's a good question. I really think not a global one that applies universally to everyone. I really think when you do assessments on individuals for levels of support that they might require, you've got to look at the behavioral component. You've got to look at the ADL, or activities of daily living component, because a lot of our staffing ratios are predicated on what people can't do for themselves, right? If they have no cooking skills, we need staff to cook for them. If they can't self-administer medications, we need staff to do that for them. If they need hand-over-hand assistance to adequately complete bathing or showering or washing their hair, that's a staffing intensive kind of issue. So there's multiple factors as to what constitutes a ratio of staffing for the population of people that you're supporting. So what I do usually is I look at each of the individuals. If I go into a residence that's just being developed, I do an individual assessment of what a person's needs are. And then I actually might have a document that if this person wants to email me, I might be able to send them if I can find it. It's very comprehensive. I think you'll like it. It's actually used in the state of Connecticut. It's what's called a level of need assessment. Very comprehensive. It's like 140 different elements. And in that level of need assessment, that helps you determine what level of staff support or supervision that person is going to need. Obviously, that can have behavioral issues as well. If a person has a high degree of problematic or intense challenging behaviors, that can require more intensive staffing as well. Good question. Any others?
Well, this person also said we see ratios of 2-to-1, 3-to-1. In the state I'm in, if a family asks for enhanced ratio, they get it. There are rarely formal clinical recommendations or based on standardized assessment. And she said, thanks, I'm also going to email you.
Yeah, isn't that amazing? So, parent or guardian, this kind of makes my point. So we get a parent or guardian that probably is politically connected. I hate to be cynical, but that happens a lot. They know the commissioner or something. And they say, hey, my son or daughter is getting screwed. They need this, that, and the other thing. They need more staff. I want more staff. Poof, more staff appears. Now, remember, we're in the midst of a major staffing crisis. So I don't know where the pixie dust that makes these staff comes from. But anyway, if we can get it, exactly my point. Okay, you got more staff. Now what? Why did you want more staff? Why did you need more staff? What level of support and assistance is this staff going to provide for your loved one? I'm not saying it might not be necessary, but for God's sakes, specify somehow, reasonably, empirically, what it is you think you need and how you're going to deliver it before you just go out and ask for it. And God forbid, then you get it. And we still don't know what to do with it. That's the problem I see. All right, let me move on. What is the function of the one-to-one? Perfect segue, right? What is, this gets back to the title of today's webinar. One-to-one staffing, what exactly does it mean? What does it mean? What does it mean? Most of the times I'm involved with agencies, they don't know what it means. I've got to help them figure it out, but that's okay, that's my job. But I would like to think that they had some clue as to how they were going to utilize what I consider this precious resource. Let me make it very clear. When a person gets a one-to-one, I believe that is a precious resource, an inexpensive one. So how are we going to maximize the value and the utility of the one-to-one? And that's what really motivated me to do this webinar. Historically, this is what I've seen. Historically, one-to-ones have been assigned primarily to act in a pseudo bodyguard type of role. I'm not trying to offend anybody. I'm just being real. This is a serious problem or mistake. So a person has a one-to-one. Don't let him do this. Do this if he does that. Don't let him run out the door. If he does, chase him and bring him back. If he starts to assault anybody and they can't protect themselves, get involved and protect the person from being that's what I call an adult bodyguard. That's kind of what I think of historically the roles of one-to-ones have been. And I think that's a shame. I think that's so limiting of what their function could and should be. Then some of the other issues that people have already asked in their astute questions, are there specific guidelines, interventions, or scripts that have been provided to the one-to-one so they know exactly if, when, how to respond? In many cases I've been involved with, no, this doesn't exist. So somebody starts to assault a peer, the one-to-one immediately jumps into action, hopefully. And do they know what they should do at that point? Are they getting involved in the fray, trying to pull the person away? Or have they been properly trained in whatever curriculum, including, positive behavior supports and strategies for physical intervention if and when they become necessary, typically under an emergency situation? Do they even know how to do what might be necessary under those extreme situations? Many times I would say no. So what's the function of the one-to-one then? What is the general level of dialogue and communication expected or allowed between the one-to-one and the person to whom they have been assigned? I don't know about you, but I've seen one-to-ones that don't communicate with the person. They just sit there with their arms folded, waiting for the person to have a problematic behavior so they can justify their one-to-one position. That's terrible. It's terrible if that's what they're doing. Of course, the converse of that is if you talk too much to the person while they're not having problem behaviors, which I would argue is reinforcing pro-social, adaptive, acceptable, responsible behavior. Other people would call it giving attention. We can debate that till the cows come home. Maybe the person is really enjoying the fact that they have a one-to-one. So we have to be careful there, right? Because if we've given the person a one-to-one because of their quote unquote bad or problematic behavior, we don't want them thinking that this is a good thing. We don't want them thinking this is a positive thing, because we already talked about them developing a dependency on the presence of the one, but they won't ever want it to end because I got my own staff. So you have to be real careful with this. And oftentimes, in my experience, I haven't seen people break it down or think it through to the extent that we're talking about today. Just haven't seen it. Here's the role of the one-to-one, to include providing enhanced opportunities for positive experience, such as preferred community outings or activities. So again, I believe That should be part of the function of a one. Obviously, only delivering these things when the person is exhibited consistent, socially responsible, appropriate behavior, acceptable behaviors. And then I would have no problem with a one-to-one saying, hey, Joe, you know what? You've had a phenomenal day. You've treated everybody respectfully. You've been safe. You've followed all the rules. You know, why don't you and I quickly run out and we'll get a coffee at Dunkin' Donuts? I have no problem with someone doing that in that context. If they're doing it randomly, or they're not reinforcing anything that occurred prior to them delivering whatever this preferred outing or activity is, that doesn't make a lot of sense to me. Because again, that feeds into the individual thinking, oh, this is great. I got a one-to-one. I can go anywhere and do anything I want whenever I want. And I've had a lot of people think just the way I described. That's happened to me many times. Presence of one-to-one being inadvertently reinforcing. Unless the one-to-one, we talked about the lack of training that oftentimes comes with the assignment of a one-to-one staff, if we can even find that staff. Unless the one-to-one has been thoroughly and properly trained, it is very common that the supported person will be inadvertently reinforced by the presence and assignment of the one-to-one if they are receiving an excessive or disproportionate amount of attention. So again, can the one-to-one provide a real, I'm gonna give you the word I've always used. I don't like the word one-to-one. I've never liked it. I prefer to call a one-to-one staff person a tutor. Tutor, as in T-U-T-O-R, tutor. An intensive teacher, an intensive trainer. A great opportunity for a person to learn all kinds of skills that they might not normally have because they have a tutor assigned just for them. I know in graduate school, I did some tutoring of undergraduate students. I wasn't particularly good at it, but I like to think that they learned a lot more when they got that one-to-one attention just from me, helping them discover what kind of obstacles they had in learning the material, how I could focus in on helping them get over some of those humps. They were very appreciative of it, and I think it served a very useful function in getting them to either pass that test they were afraid of or get a better grade in a course that they had some trepidation about. I think our philosophy regarding one-to-one should be the same. What a great opportunity to provide enhanced education, training, role modeling to a person that clearly needs that help. This is a much different way of thinking. And I've always thought this way. Be careful that the individual's housemates don't perceive that the supported person receiving the one-to-one is getting something extra or special, as they might believe that exhibiting increased problem behaviors is a method for them receiving their own one-to-one. Oh, I've had this happen to me. I've got Joe over here with a one-to-one, hopefully with a staff that's reasonably well trained, hopefully with a rotation of 2 to 3 people so that burnout doesn't happen and the person doesn't form an overly dependent on the presence of one particular staff to not engage in the problem behaviors. And then over here, I've got individuals in the house watching all this going on. And if we're not careful, they think that somehow that individual who is exhibiting all these problem behaviors that we would prefer that they not be exhibiting is getting some kind of a bonus. That's why you got to be careful if we're going out to Dunkin' Donuts every day and this person goes out once a week. Hey, what the hell? What about me? Why does Joe get to go out every day for a coffee? Well, because he has a one-to-one. Oh, I want one of them too. Do you see how quickly, from the perspective of an individual that we support, this can go in a bad direction? I'm laughing. I don't find it comical at all, but I do find some of these situations that we put ourselves in based on our stupidity, including my own above everybody else's. I'm like, what were we thinking? How did we get to this point? Crazy. It has been my experience those of you that have attended some of the other webinars I've done, this is a sticking point for me. I will always argue that the quality of staff is more important than the quantity. So that's why when I get involved in situations, and I still get involved in them all the time, where the agency says, we need more staff. If we just had more staff, and they're not talking about filling vacancies, which is a problem right now, big time. They're talking about enhancing their staff to person ratio. Like one of the other questions that the person asked earlier was, how do you determine a ratio? Well, you determine it based on individuals' needs. You don't say, poof, we have 6 people living in this house and we're allocating 2 staff. Well, that may be fine, but if 5 out of 6 of those people are non-ambulatory, I'm telling you right now, 2 staff ain't going to do it. So there has to be a way of reasonably scientifically, objectively evaluating and assessing individuals' needs so that we can then factor or formulate a staff ratio that makes sense given their individual and collective needs. It shouldn't be this plug and play crap, which I see going on a lot. It's like, well, this is how many staff we got. Well, maybe it's too much. Maybe that's more than you need. Maybe it's too little. Maybe it's just right. Like, who was it in that old fairy tale that slept in the bear's beds? I can't remember. Someone will tell me. She said it was just right. So another problem, in addition to looking at the quality versus quantity issue, is oftentimes a one-to-one is assigned because staff collectively have not been able to manage the person's challenging behaviors, or there has been a lack of a team-oriented approach. So, before we get to one-to-one, Bill, I look at what's the behavior support plan look like? How effective has it been? Have we gone back and questioned our hypotheses regarding the underlying functions? Have we made multiple revisions? Have we done additional preference and reinforcement assessments? Have we adequately retrained all of the staff? And in my experience, when I start to ask all of those questions, it's rare that I can say yes to all of those probative questions that I was just raising. The lack of effectiveness of a previously authored and implemented behavior support plan can oftentimes lead to the necessity of assigning a one-to-one staff person as a last resort. So again, since the downside of one-to-ones, the cost, the training, the staffing shortages, the burnout factor, the person developing a dependency on the relationship, and I could go on and on. There's a huge downside to one-to-ones. It's rarely, if ever, a solution to the problem. It's usually a sign of desperation, if I can be so bold. That, we need a one-to-one. We've exhausted everything else. We're at our wits' end. We need a one-to-one. We need it now. And, depending upon what bureaucratic funding agency you're dealing with, you may or may not get lucky and you might be able to get it. So again, as I alluded to, I just remembered, I gotta put this out there because it's been in the Goldilocks. Goldilocks was the little girl in the fantasy, I think. Goldilocks and the Three Bears. Someone please correct me if I'm wrong. That'll bother me. This idea of teacher versus bodyguard that I alluded to earlier, let's talk about that. I tend to view the assignment of a one-to-one as a personal tutor or teacher that can provide a great opportunity for incidental teaching, role modeling, immediate reinforcement of pro-social and desirable behaviors, etc. So again, I'm totally flipping this around. Bodyguard versus tutor, bodyguard versus teacher. Bodyguard that only intervenes when there's severe problematic behaviors being exhibited versus a teacher or a tutor that takes advantage of multiple incidental opportunities throughout the day to teach, to reinforce, to role model. That's what I want my one-to-ones to be. And yes, in spite of all of that, occasionally, infrequently, Might they need to play the role of a bodyguard? Yes, but I want to minimize that as much as possible. Because if you don't, then that dependency kicks in, and getting rid of the one-to-one staff person can become a Herculean task. And we're going to talk about that in a few minutes. There needs to be clarification if the one-to-one is the person who is solely, again, if the one-to-one is assigned, is that the only person that intervenes and responds and interacts with the designated person who is getting the one-to-one? Is it like exclusive? Is that an exclusive relationship between the one-to-one and the supported individual? Well, in some cases, it seems to be. I've seen situations where that seems to be true. And then I've seen other situations, which I like more, where other staff can still intervene with the individual as well. So the function of the one-to-one is more to become the primary responsible or responding person. That doesn't mean that the other staff can't intervene and interact with that individual as well. Now, the reason why you want to do that is, remember, you don't want to have a one-to-one in perpetuity for lots of reasons. So you always want the support of the ancillary, the other staff, I shouldn't say ancillary, the other staff on duty, regardless of shift. You always want them to be intervening and interacting with that supported person as an adjunct in support to the one-to-one. You don't want that one-to-one to develop a totally exclusive relationship with that person for lots of reasons. Yet another question. We also need clarification whether or not the one-to-one works exclusively with this supported person. Or are they able to interact, intervene with other residents as well? Sounds like a simple question. No easy answer here. I've seen it go all ways. I've gone into houses, and I'm just giving you real life experiences. These things have happened to me and continue to happen. I'll walk into a house. Maybe an individual that has a one-to-one. Maybe I go to the house because I make a lot of my house visits early in the morning before people go to day programs. So say I show up at a residence at 7 o'clock, and a person who's still in bed sleeping that hasn't gotten up yet has a one-to-one. I walk into the house and I know the person has a one-to-one, and I know the staff person who's assigned to be that individual's one-to-one. But they're in bed sleeping, you see. So they don't need a one-to-one in the moment, obviously. And the other people in the house are up and getting ready, and people are being showered and assisted with shaving if they need it. Breakfast is being prepared. Hopefully individuals are actively participating. And I'll see the one-to-one sitting on the couch on their phone, texting, big problem. And I'll say, hey, what's going on? Oh, nothing. How you doing? I go, well, it looks like there's a lot going on in the house right now. What? Are you helping out? No, I'm Joe's one-to-one. He's upstairs in bed sleeping. And I'm like incredulous. And I go, so what's your point? Well, I'm responsible for Joe. And I go, but he's in bed sleeping. So why he's in bed sleeping? It looks like these other people could use a hand. Can't you help out with them? No, because if something happens with Joe, I got to make sure I'm available. Guys, I'm not making this stuff up. And I'm sure some of you, if you want to be honest, have had similar experiences. So did they really understand whether or not they're supposed to interact and intervene and support other people living in the house as well? Or do they think, and I'm saying in my last paragraph here, what I just described, we sometimes refer to as enhanced staffing, which I like much better than being a true exclusive one-to-one. The reason why I like the terminology enhanced staffing, because inherent in that definition is that person that's been brought in to shore up our ratios. Notice now I'm avoiding the term one-to-one. Will always have the primary responsibility to that identified individual, but it's also the expectation that they will actively become involved and supportive and assist with other individuals if and when they can, or when the individual that they're primarily responsible for supervising and supporting is behaviorally exhibiting great stability, appears to be in a very good mood, it maybe is actively participating in the milieu of the house along with their housemates, which would be something that we would obviously prefer. Okay, let's jump to poll question number 2, if you could, Marissa.
Alrighty, so determining the precise function or role of the one-to-one is essential. True or false? Awesome. Thank you guys for voting so quickly today. Alrighty, so I am going to shut this down in 3, 2, and 1. Alright, it looks like everyone said true.
Wow, we're on a roll today. Any questions before we move on to the next section? Comments, concerns, clarification?
Yeah, so most of my one-on-one experience has been with children, and I always felt that once a one-on-one was added to the behavior plan, that it was nearly impossible to remove that support later on. It was extremely rare that there was any plan for fading one-to-one support once it was implemented. Is there a problem in adult services as well? I have to imagine that it is.
Well, I don't know if this person got the handouts in advance, but that's exactly what we're going to talk about for the next 20 minutes. In fact, that's such a great question, and it's so germane to what I'm about to talk about. Look at that, just by chance, dependency. Exactly what that person just said. Now, I have told all of you, well, not all of you, because I don't know all of you. I don't know if all of you have been here before, but I've told people that have attended before. The vast majority of my experience is with intellectually disabled adults, 22, 21 years of age and above. I have worked in residential school settings. I have worked with kids. Quite honestly, I'm not very good at it. That's probably why I need to work on my grandparenting skills too, now that I think of it. It's just not my thing. I've always migrated to working towards adults with intellectual disabilities, and that's been my entire career, which is kind of like the opposite of most behavior analysts, the vast majority of whom work with children and in-home supports or school settings, right? I mean, so, yeah, I think that dependency that person just acknowledged, they see with the assignment of one-to-ones, absolutely occurs equitably with the adult population. And it's a perfect segue to what we're going to talk about right now. And we will have plenty of time for questions and answers, but that was such a profound question, and it's so relevant to the material I'm about to present. I couldn't let the opportunity go. So the long-term assignment of a one-to-one staff person often results in the support persons developing a dependency upon the presence of that staff to prevent them from engaging in dangerous and/or undesirable behaviors. Exactly the point that person just made by asking the questions based on their experience and observation. That's been mine. Another reason why I'm not a huge fan of one-to-ones, because it's great if I can get it, I guess. I don't think it's so great because I think there's other ways of addressing problem behaviors short of assigning a bodyguard. But if and when you can do that, if you don't know what you're doing, if you don't have a very carefully orchestrated plan, if the one-to-one staff person does not understand their function, this is what you get: a long-term dependency, which is exceptionally difficult to break. This is similar, I believe this is similar to the phenomenon when people need some type of external mechanical device to prevent them from engaging in some form of dangerous, usually self-injurious behavior. Haven't a lot of us worked with people that engaged in significant SIV that needed a helmet to prevent them from engaging in the behavior? And they wear the helmet for several years, months, years. maybe decades. Some of my folks have. And then I decide I want to extricate them from the need or the dependency on wearing that helmet. Good luck with that. I'm not saying it can't be done, but you better have a very well thought out, orchestrated plan if you're going to take that on. And I do take it on because I don't want people having to wear a hockey helmet that makes them look kind of silly, walking around in the community that stigmatizes them. That's not blending in. It's not my idea of going out in the community and not having people look at you in an odd kind of way. I want people to go out and be integrated into society seamlessly. So yes, I'm always concerned about that kind of stuff. If you have a person that's engaging in severe forms of picking or even punching themselves in the head, I've had many over the years, sometimes with great intensity. You put on some kind of an arm splint, a mechanical restraint device that prevents them from being able to reach, that has all kinds of problems. I usually inherit these people, by the way. I don't create them. I inherit them from other places. I'm not going to mention where. So this dependency has already been established. And I view my job or my primary role is to try to break that dependency over time. So I do think there's a parallel here between those types of devices that I just mentioned and the presence of the one-to-one staff person. It's not an exact mirror of one another, but I think the dependency that the supported person develops on the presence of the staff is comparable to the presence of those supportive and protective devices or mechanical restraints, to be more honest about it, they might have to utilize to prevent them from engaging in dangerous and harmful behaviors. All right, I'll stop for a moment to see if there's any other questions, because I kind of cut off the questions because I wanted to immediately talk about dependency since that person had raised the issue.
There was just one more. Is there a formal way to assess support ratios? And if not, what would you include?
Well, as I said before, if this person wants to email me, I do have a device that Connecticut developed a number of years ago, which I think is very good and comprehensive. It's called a level of need. I want to give credit where it's due, Connecticut. I'm not trying to steal your device. I think it's actually quite good. And that level of need, which I don't think it's copyrighted. If it is, I'm going to share it anyway, because it's a good piece of work. If you go through that 140 approximate assessment, behaviorally has to do with communication. All of these factors influence what level of support a person needs. It's not just about whether or not they can cook, clean, and take a shower. It's much more involved and comprehensive. I'll be happy to send that person the device that Connecticut has developed a number of years ago, which I think is quite good. Any other questions, Marissa?
No, that was it.
Okay. So let's talk about fading and removal. Now that we've created this dependency monster, how the heck do we get out of it? Well, that's a good question. And that oftentimes is not that easy. This is something that when I go to various state committees, and depending upon which state you're in, there are different groups of people that you have to go to advocate and justify is really what you need to do. Why you believe you need enhanced staffing. I usually use that term when I go in as opposed to one-to-ones. I like the concept of enhanced staffing better than one-to-one. All the things we've discussed, all the reasons we've discussed today. It's understood that if and when that funding agency agrees to give you that additional money to put the additional staffing in place, it is not going to be in place in perpetuity. There's an expectation, rightfully so, that at some point at some point, based on some objective, measurable criteria. Easy to say, not so easy to do. We have now made a determination that we are at the point that we can begin to gradually extricate, fade, minimize that one-to-one support in the hopes of eliminating it entirely. So let's talk about that. Fading and removal. First question. Have explicit criteria been identified as to when the need for the one-to-one will be gradually reduced and eventually eliminated? Oftentimes, the answer to this question is no. Well, how are you going to know when you can carefully, planfully fade it or remove it if there's no objective criteria? You're just going to wake up one day and go, gee, Joe's been pretty good the past few months. I think we can get rid of that one-to-one. I guess you could do it that way, but that's not the most scientific or database methodology. So I'd encourage you or dissuade you from that approach and try to come up with something that's a little bit more data-based. One of the dilemmas inherent in assigning a one-to-one is that the person's behavior oftentimes improves as a direct result of having a one-to-one. Yet the desire or goal is always to eliminate the need or dependency on one-to-one staff. So think about this. It's almost like an oxymoron, kind of. Probably not the right analogy. So let's assume that we have data that shows that the person's identified problematic target behaviors have been reduced dramatically in frequency and or intensity, or both, as a function of having a one-to-one assigned. So we can't ever really prove cause and effect, but there's a compelling correlation between when the one-to-one became available and over time the person's behaviorally becoming more stable, more appropriate, less problematic, less unpredictable, etc. And maybe, arguably, it's the very fact that the person has a one-to-one, a well-trained one-to-one, who knows exactly what to do and how to intervene, that's been responsible for that improvement. In many cases, I've seen that happen. Now the problem is, it's kind of counterintuitive. Okay, now that the person has done so well, they're doing so remarkably well, because they have that enhanced staffing or one-to-one, or whatever you want to refer to it as, now we need to get rid of it. Well, part of me wants to say, well, wait a minute, whoa, hold the phone. That's kind of crazy. If the reason why the person is doing so much better is because they have this additional staff support, why would I want to take it away? That's the very reason why they're doing so well. So why don't we just keep it? Well, the answer to that question is it's expensive, and that having additional staffing to prevent a person from taking more responsibility and accountability for his or her own behavior forever is not the desired option or outcome that we're looking for. So at some point you're going to find that people are going to say, and I think it's reasonable. First, I used to fight this. I used to go, well, I'm not going to remove the enhanced staffing because that's obviously we've demonstrated the need based on the positive outcome. What are you talking about? But I've softened. Maybe as I get older, I don't want to fight as much. But I actually think there's something to be said about that's a relevant argument. How do we get rid of the one-to-one? It is rare that you can successfully facilitate an abrupt elimination or termination of one-to-one staffing. So I will tell you this from personal experience. You know, if you think you're going to just one day decide that that one-to-one is no longer necessary, so you just abruptly and immediately terminate it, and you expect the supported individual to be able to manage that extrication without some fallout, you're probably delusional. There's probably going to be some significant fallout from that. So, since the inevitability of fading or removal is in fact inevitable, these are some ideas and thoughts about how we can go ahead and do that. Over time, incrementally, planfully, well orchestrated. This is not throwing things against the wall and see what sticks. This is a much more planful, methodical approach than just saying, okay, well, we don't have money for the one-to-one, so we're terminating it effective tomorrow. Sometimes that does happen that way, but the outcome generally is usually not a positive. So let's talk about considerations for fading and removal. These are a couple of different methods I've used, other clinicians have used, which I think makes sense. And I'll be happy to hear people's thoughts about this. One method simply involves the one-to-one gradually increasing their physical proximity or distance from the supported person. So I like this one. So maybe the one-to-one started out in what we call an arm's length capacity, which literally means, depending upon the volatility of the person's behavior, the unpredictability, the intensity, whatever, we say to the one-to-one when they first are hired, you'll always need to be an arm's length of this person, with the exception of, I'm just throwing it out there, the two exceptions are usually when they're in their bed sleeping or when they're using the bathroom. And sometimes, believe it or not, depending upon the situation, the person might require arm's length supervision while they're using the bathroom, which obviously has dignity issues associated with it. But, depending upon what the behavior is and how much it manifests itself in a private bathroom setting, you may have no choice but to do that kind of thing initially, as much as I find it distasteful. So one method is gradually having the staff person move like what do they teach us in shaping? I think the term in applied behavioral analysis is successive approximations. So think of this in terms of successive approximations, removing myself away. So instead of being arm's length, literally 3 feet away, I'm now 4 feet away. I'm 6 feet away. I'm 10 feet away. He's sitting across the room from me, but that's good enough because that level of supervision has now proven to be adequate. So again, one method for implementing methodically, incrementally, a fading procedure is a physical proximity of the one-to-one or the enhanced staff person to the supported person. Another technique, which is oftentimes utilized, involves prompting, right? So we gradually fade either the number or the number of prompts or the type of prompts provided to the supported person. So again, it can be done either by number of prompts that we're providing, typically verbal prompts, or the type of prompts. On the hierarchy of prompting, as you know, physical prompting is considered much more intrusive and invasive than gestural prompting and verbal prompting. So if there was a prompting sequence as part of the one-to-one or enhanced staffing involvement, we might want to take a real good look at that and see how we can gradually fade either the number or types of prompts being provided. So that's another method of fading or backing off, if you will, of the one-to-one or the enhanced staffing. Still another technique, which I like, involves the one-to-one or the enhanced staff. If the person is surely an enhanced staff, then they should already be blending in, right? Because I said before, enhanced staffing means that you don't have an exclusive relationship with the supported individual. It's not a true one-to-one. They're your primary responsibility, but you still have other responsibilities. I like that much better. So still another technique involves gradually blending in regarding supervising and assisting other residents. Of course, this can and should be during times when the targeted supported person is showing signs of stability, or during those times or environments correlated with less likelihood of problem behaviors. So the three most common methods, and these are not mutually exclusive, you can use a combination of all of these things. As long as it's planful, data-based, something that we can measure the outcome of, hopefully, rather than the pseudoscientific stuff that we're doing an awful lot of these days. As I mentioned before, data, what data? The data is the number one problem in the field right now. In most places, it doesn't exist. And the accuracy and reliability of the data, that's a whole nother question, a big question. So again, we want to get back to our roots. We want to get back to more of a scientific methodology, which we've strayed markedly from. Guilty as charged, me included. Over the last year and a half, clinical supports, behavioral supports have been really put on the back burner. Really put on the back burner. We're more concerned about, do we have staffing? Do they have a roof over their head? Do we even have, can we take them out in the community? So we're basically providing staffing for the bare essentials. So clinical and behavioral supports in my world, in my thinking, has never been considered a luxury, but it's kind of become that over the last year and a half, because the more urgent critical needs for just basic survival have taken priority. I think it's really important, and I stress this in all the webinars. Let's get back to the thinking. Let's get back to our training. Let's get back to the way we're supposed to be doing things, clinically and behaviorally, and not accept this grossly watered down version that's become the reality. I think we owe it to the people we support to do that. Any questions about the spading and removal? Any other ideas that people have that are listening that maybe have done fading using a different methodology, a different criteria? I'd be curious, because the ones I've mentioned are the ones I tend to see most commonly.
I don't have any feedback right now.
Okay. So, those of you that have attended my other webinars know that I'm pretty straightforward, brutally honest, sometimes to a fault. So now we're going to talk about ulterior motives, because I think this is relevant, and I think it's a factor, it's an issue. I run into this a lot. Very, very simply, many agencies are reluctant to give up the additional funding they receive for the assignment of a dedicated one-to-one staff person. This is an observation I have made on many, many, many occasions. So let's think about this. We jump through all the hoops to get the one-to-one funding. We decide that we're at the end of our proverbial rope, that it's not the staffing we already have that aren't doing what they should be doing. It's not the training of the staff. It's not the ineffectiveness of a behavior support plan that we haven't revised or modified on multiple occasions. It's not the reinforcements or incentives that we've incorporated into the person's BSP that aren't particularly effective or potent. If we've done all of that, we fought like hell to get the one-to-one, and we finally convinced the funding powers that be that there is no other alternative than to give us the additional funding for one-to-one. Well, my experience has been, in most of my relationships with agencies, I report directly to the CEO or the executive director. There's lots of reasons why I do that. I'm not going to get into it right now, but trust me, that didn't happen by accident. Now, I'm advising them that a person may have grown behavior, may have taken more responsibility for their behavior, Maybe some medication changes were made during this entire process that have helped that person get some of the psychiatric symptomology, which manifests as behaviors, under better control. That the predetermined criteria or objective that we'd established has been met. So we are now at a point where we need to consider aggressively fading, if not eliminating, the one-to-one. You know, the first response I usually get from folks when I suggest we're at that point, I'm not doing that. I'm not doing that. And of course, I ask why. I already know the answer, but I ask the question. And it almost always comes down to, do you know how hard I had to fight to get that extra money? Do you think I'm going to give that back? And my response to that is, yeah, we should give it back. It's the moral, ethical thing to do. If the person has grown behaviorally and can take more responsibility for their own actions, and we no longer can clinically justify the ongoing continuance of the one-to-one or enhanced staffing, we should give it back. Because I can assure you that even though this person may not require it anymore, which is a testament to the hard work of the staff, the agency, and everybody involved, I take very little credit for it. If the person has met the established objective and criteria for not requiring it anymore, I can assure you there are many, many other people out there that are being supported and served by either our agency or other agencies that probably need that one-to-one or that enhanced staffing right now more than this person does. Sometimes they go, you're right, that's the right thing to do. Many times, unfortunately, the answer is, well, that's fine, but I'm not giving the money back. Well, ethically, I have a real problem with that. And I can tell you this, in some states, particularly Connecticut, where I worked for the vast majority of my career, when I went and advocated for a one-to-one, the people on the committees that determined whether or not a one-to-one was necessary knew damn well if I was asking for it, I needed it. Because I don't like to ask for it. I don't think it's a solution. And they knew that. And I can also tell you this from my own experience. Whenever I went back to those committees and said, you know what? I no longer need this enhanced staffing. I no longer need the one-to-one funding. From this point forward, we're handing it back to you. Give it to somebody right now that really needs it more than this individual does. Thank you very much for giving it to me when I needed it. When you establish that kind of a relationship of mutual respect and credibility with these funding agencies, when you do go to them on those rare occasions and say you've got a problem and you need additional funding, you're probably going to get it. Because they respect that you're not using it or abusing it or prolonging it when you don't need it. Just sharing that observation with you. For that reason that I just described in detail, sometimes an agency may be motivated to make it appear that a supported person is not making as much progress or improvement behaviorally as they are. That's wrong on so many levels. I'm not even going to get into it because I'll start using profanity. I don't want to do that. So that the agency then can argue the need for continuance of one-to-one staffing. So the dirty little secret is sometimes agencies actually don't want people to get as much better as I do, because it's going to mean that they're going to lose some resources and some funding. And that's a tragedy. Because if a good plan has been put in place and if enhanced staffing has been justified, if there's been an orchestrated plan, if staff have been well trained, if everybody works as a team, if we've done a proper fading plan criteria, and we've broken or lessened the person's dependency on the enhanced staffing of the one-to-one, we damn well should give it back. And don't you dare make the person look like they're worse than they are. This has happened to me. so that you can go to the funding sources and say, they're not ready. They still got problems. We still need the additional funding. That is, well, I'm not going to use the adjectives I'd like to use for that. As a general rule, one-to-one staffing support should be time limited and based on some measurable criteria where it's fading and hopeful discontinuation is anticipated and expected. So I can think of very, very few situations where a person should require a one-to-one or enhanced staffing in perpetuity. They do exist, but they're exceedingly rare. And I'm not even going to mention the one or two extreme situations where that might be warranted. Having said that, poll question number 3, please.
Okay, everyone. So examples of fading of a one-to-one can include less prompting, type or number, increasing physical distance, assisting other peers, or all of the above.
You get
Awesome.
100% on this, Marissa. It'll be a new record.
It so far, no, it was so far 100%, but I think somebody, Alrighty, everybody. Thank you so much. I'm gonna shut this out. Let's see. Couple votes. Let's see what happened. Looks like 4% said assisting other peers and 96% said all of the above.
Yeah, all of the above. Like I said, you can pick.
They were still right.
What's that?
Technically, they were still correct.
How do you figure they're still correct if they only picked 1 out of 3 and it's all of them?
Well, right, but you know,
You're in a very generous mood today, Marissa.
it's for
I
Happy
am
Friday.
too. All right, we're going to call that 100%. You know, no one. 96 isn't bad. All right, we have about 10 minutes remaining for questions and answers, comments about today's presentation. This is a topic. You know, when I come up with these, it's funny because a lot of my peers that work in the field say, quote unquote, they ask me, they said, Kev, how the hell do you come up with these topics? And really, I say, these are the things that I think are relevant to our field that I don't see a lot of material about. I don't see much activity or critical thinking going into, you know, I see lots of people talking about getting more staff and we need more staff and we need a one-to-one. But beyond that, which is just basically a statement, I don't really see people. Maybe it's out there happening and I'm just not aware of it. That's quite possible because I don't look as much anymore because I don't think it's out there. So if it is, please tell me. That'll mean I have to do less webinars. We can all go to other people's webinars for information. But the reason why I do these types of things is because I don't think we've done a lot of critical thinking about how we're utilizing this this is a precious, when you get a one-to-one, that is a precious, precious resource. It's expensive, it's intense, and if you're going to do it, you need to do it right. And unfortunately, a lot of the agencies where I've been involved, they just throw a one-to-one in there. They basically say, Joe is your responsibility. And, you know, don't let him do this. Don't let him do this. We don't want him to do this. If he tries to leave, you need to immediately follow him and make sure he's not getting into trouble. And that's about the extent of it. And then we wonder why people aren't growing or taking more responsibility, accountability for their behavior when we haven't done all of the techniques and the interventions that we described earlier in today's webinar. So I hope this has been educational for you. I hope this has given you some additional ideas. And if anybody has any questions or answers, now is the time to ask. We have 10 minutes remaining.
Alrighty, everybody. So thank you so much for staying so far. And I did just want to thank Kevin for doing a continuation of the series. And yes, everybody, please go ahead into the store and go and join us on November, what was it, 19th and December 17th
Yes.
for the other sessions. So as I said, I will be analyzing all of that poll data on Monday, and you'll have your CEU certificate instructions to you Monday morning, probably by lunchtime. Now, if so that certificate that you'll get in your email probably about an hour from now, that's going to be your certificate of completion. That is not a CEU certificate, so just keep that in mind. But now if you did have like another oh, actually, never mind. Okay, so awesome. Let's just get to the Q&A. If you had any questions, feel free to put them in the questions box, and we're just gonna end off the webinar with the questions. So, do you also agree that one-on-one staff to an individual is a negative to the person who gets it and to other staff, as a person is seen as really bad, and then the one-on-one is the only one who can handle them?
That can happen. Yeah, the problem is it's oftentimes not perceived as a negative by the supported person, because if the function of the one-to-one is to provide all kinds of fun stuff and activities and events and outings that they can do, because hey, they're the one-to-one, it's just me and you, kid, why not? That's where that perception of the one-to-one is a negative bodyguard. You've been bad, therefore you need this resource. You need to be very, very careful of the perception of that person by not only the supported person, but by their housemates, because that negative perspective can oftentimes be turned into a positive perspective. And they think that that person is getting a whole lot more attention than their housemate might be, who's acting appropriately and responsibly, but they don't have a one-to-one, who's doing fun things with them and talking to them and playing games. And I'm not saying that some of that stuff might not be warranted, but that's why it has to be so carefully orchestrated and planned, because that negative perspective can get turned 180 into a very positive perspective. So the balance of what we want is clearly somewhere between those two extremes. But yes, I do see that. Good question.
Awesome. And it doesn't really seem like we have any other questions, but just a lot of thank yous, and thank you for an excellent presentation as always.
Thank you,
Um,
guys.
So, all right. Oh, thank you, Amy. Thank you, Michelle. And Kathy, thank you so much. All right, everybody. Well, I think that's about it. Kevin, thank you so much for doing this with us.
You're welcome.
I'll be in touch, about next month's session. And everybody go grab your seats to next month on the 19th. And then December's is on the 17th. So go get your seats for those as well. And I hope you all have a wonderful weekend. And you'll be hearing from me about your certificates on Monday morning. Have a good weekend, guys.
Thank you, Marissa.
Bye.
Bye-bye.